Dillian Whyte says that Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder get too much credit for their padded, cherry-picked records. So I'm going to quote Dillian Whyte directly here. He said, "Everyone lets him," as in Tyson Fury, "get away with bleep. It's frustrating. Klitschko was a great fighter, a great champion. But when he fought Klitschko, I don't know what happened to Klitschko that day. Vladimir, sometimes he's good, and other times it didn't seem like he was there to fight. With Vladimir, it's like some fights he's good, then other fights, it's like he's just psychologically not there. He wasn't there that night for sure, and we never got to see the rematch. Fury and Wilder get too much credit for their padded cherry-pick records and have only beaten one current Ring Magazine top 10 fighter each. I've beaten 3. Fury calls himself the greatest of all time, yet has turned down fights against me even when ordered by the WBC. The guy's a joker. Fury fought Wilder and beat Wilder, but I've been trying to fight Wilder for a long time. If I had fought Wilder, I'd have beaten Wilder before Fury. If I'd have beaten Wilder, I'd be undisputed WBC champion by now. As things stand, there are 2 WBC World Heavyweight Champions. We have the exact same belt. How can Fury fight to be undisputed when he is not even the undisputed WBC champion?" All right, those are the words of the body snatcher Dillian Whyte. Now, while I think he has somewhat of a point with regards to Fury and Wilder's resumes, at the same time, you can't minimize what Tyson Fury did, particularly when I'm talking about Fury, what he did against Klitschko and against Wilder. People say that Klitschko just didn't show up for that Fury fight. I think that Klitschko did show up. I just think that people are overlooking the fact that Klitschko has always had psychological chinks in his armor. He's always been a guy who likes to be in total control in the ring. When he's not in total control, he tends to get anxious. And this is what the holding was about in a lot of Vladimir Klitschko fights. Very early on, and most Klitschko opponents back in the days were much shorter than him, he would jump all over the opponent in the clinches, lean on them, push their heads down way beyond what is permissible in a boxing ring legally. And the most horrendous fight where he did this was the Povetkin fight, where he really should have been disqualified long before the 12th round. I mean, obviously he didn't get disqualified at all, but I'm saying if they'd had fair refereeing in there, Vladimir would have been out of there. Horrendous display by Klitschko in that fight. And the reason he did that against Povetkin and many other fighters is to establish control. Excessive holding and leaning down, pushing down on opponents to wear them out, to take a lot of the energy out of them. He wanted to feel in physical control at every step of the way. And the fights where he wasn't allowed to do that, you could see Vladimir Klitschko's body language was totally different. The look on his face. And one fight in particular against Bryant Jennings is a great example. Because prior to Jennings, he fought Kubrat Pulev, right? That fight ended in a knockout. He managed to drop Pulev twice in the first round, which again allowed him to establish a certain degree of control. And that was a great performance by Klitschko. But by the end of that fight, he was so relieved that the fight was over because of the anxiousness that he was feeling by how stubborn Pulev was. But obviously, he had dropped him several times and hurt him and what have you. But in the Bryant Jennings fight, he was not allowed to hold. This is a shorter guy in Bryant Jennings, around 6'3", who was trying to get in close against Klitschko and let shots go. And that fight took place in America. The referee did not allow Klitschko to hold. And you could see in Klitschko's face and in his body language that he was very anxious because he wasn't allowed to do what he normally does, which is hold. And that makes him feel psychologically safe. That makes him feel psychologically, okay, I'm in control of this fight. Because this guy is going to start getting worn down once I lean on him. He's going to start feeling frustrated. These are the things that Klitschko relies on psychologically. But when they're taken away from him, he feels naked. And you could see that in the Bryant Jennings fight. Because really, Klitschko's fought much better punches than Jennings. Much more effective pressure fighters, much more dangerous fighters in general. So it wasn't Jennings himself, it was the fact that Klitschko wasn't allowed to use certain tactics that make him feel mentally comfortable. That's the anxiety he was wrestling with in that Jennings fight. So Klitschko's always been like that. And against Tyson Fury, he was up against the guy who had much longer arms than him, taller than him. This is a position Klitschko's not used to. And he had confidence, moving around the ring, feinting. He was basically doing to Klitschko, to some extent, because, Fury didn't really hold at all in the fight, hardly at all. But in terms of using the height and reach and frustrating Klitschko, he was doing something similar to Klitschko, to what Klitschko normally does to his opponents. So it was the tables being turned on Klitschko. That's the reason that he wasn't letting his hands go. That's the reason that he was super cautious, because he wasn't used to that situation. Klitschko is very robotic. That's what people used to say about him. Physically, but also mentally, he's kind of robotic. He needs to be in a certain routine in order to feel comfortable and in order to get fights won. When someone can come in and disrupt his routine and not allow him to carry on with the same patterns that he normally does in the ring, that's when you can make Klitschko anxious. And that's what Tyson Fury did fantastically well in the lead up to the fight and in the fight itself. He took Klitschko out of his comfort zone, didn't allow him to have the things that he normally has. The ability to grab and lean on, the height and the reach. It was all gone for Klitschko. So I have to disagree with Dillian Whyte when he says Klitschko wasn't there that night. I think Klitschko was there. I just think that Dillian Whyte doesn't understand or doesn't realize maybe, or just maybe he does realize this, but because he's a competitor, because he's a rival of Tyson Fury, he doesn't want to see the things I'm talking about. But then again, he did say himself, sometimes Klitschko doesn't show up for fights mentally and other times he does. So he seems to be suggesting that it's not only the Tyson Fury fight where that happened. But the reason that Klitschko doesn't turn up for certain fights, I believe it's what I just explained. It's because when he's taken out of his comfort zone, when he can't do certain things that make him feel mentally comfortable in a fight, that's when he's going to get hesitant. That's when he's going to get anxious. And that's what happened in the Tyson Fury fight. And that's credit to Tyson Fury. That's not something that just happened with Klitschko out of the blue for no reason. No, Tyson Fury created that situation, made him feel anxious like that. You understand? We have to give credit to Fury for that. But as far as depth in Tyson Fury's resume, that's where I can agree with Dillian Whyte. There isn't much depth there. He's got Vladimir Klitschko. He's got Deontay Wilder twice. Beyond that, there isn't much depth. You've got Derek Chisora twice, I guess. Who else is on Tyson Fury's resume? I mean, Otto Wallin might turn out to be a better win than people gave him credit for at the time. But yeah, it's definitely not the deepest resume. And as far as Deontay Wilder, well, there really is nothing there. He's got 2 wins over Luis Ortiz, but who has Luis Ortiz ever beat? What's Luis Ortiz ever done? There's nothing there. Berman Stavern twice. I mean, shrugging my shoulders. Realistically, people, Alexander Povetkin is better than Luis Ortiz. There is absolutely no evidence you could possibly present to me to make any credible case that Ortiz is better than Povetkin. Now, is Povetkin more worn out than Ortiz at this stage? By 2021, 2020? Maybe. Even though they're a similar age, right? Ortiz and Povetkin. Perhaps Ortiz is even older. Ortiz hasn't taken the wear and tear that Povetkin has taken in his professional career. That one I can give you. Povetkin's had plenty of tough fights. Been stopped numerous times now. Was stopped, obviously, in the Dillian Whyte rematch. Stopped against Anthony Joshua, but also took a lot of punishment against Vladimir Klitschko, took plenty of punishment against Michael Hunter, took punishment in the Chagayev and the Marco Huck fights back in the days, had a tough fight against Carlos Takam. So plenty of wear and tear on Povetkin. But at Povetkin's peak, this is a guy with better credentials than Luis Ortiz. Amateur and pro. Better resume. But yet nobody's jumping up and down about AJ beating Povetkin, who is a similar age to Ortiz when Wilder beat Ortiz, and didn't have as much wear and tear on him when AJ beat Povetkin as he does now, of course. And he'd only had one loss going into that AJ fight. So people don't make a big deal about that, but these PBC cult members want to make a big deal about Deontay Wilder beating Ortiz, who really couldn't lace Povetkin's boots if you're talking about them prime for prime. But there you go. So I definitely agree with regards to Wilder's resume, but with Fury's resume, I think he's being a little unkind and not giving Fury the credit that he does deserve. As I've said before in many videos, Fury is a guy who seems to want to maneuver his way through his career similar to how Floyd Mayweather did, where he's not just taking on everybody, but instead he's being very strategic about taking the right fights at the right time against the right people. And some of these people that he fights are going to be elite, like Vladimir Klitschko, like Deontay Wilder. But a lot of the guys in between, not so much. You know, this is an individual who does take very big risks, and it was tremendous risks that he took fighting Vladimir Klitschko and Deontay Wilder in their backyards. Not like he had any choice, to be fair, against Klitschko. Didn't have any choice. That was the only way he was going to get a title shot at a time, and therefore he had to go over to Germany like everybody else did and fight Klitschko. But with Deontay Wilder, he didn't have to take that risk. He'd only had 2 comeback fights against nobody's, really. And he decided, you know what? Even though I'm not in the greatest physical condition, I'm going to straight away go into this Deontay Wilder fight. You have to give him credit for taking a risk like that. Yeah, he could have had more comeback fights, more rehabilitation fights. He could have fought Anthony Joshua instead. He chose to go the Wilder route. Maybe he felt like Wilder was easier than Joshua at the time. I don't know. In fact, that's probably the case. But either way, he didn't have to fight at that level that soon into his comeback. They could have built him and built him. He could have been more ready. But he decided to take the risk. So you got to give him credit for that. But there was a big reward attached to taking that risk. And of course, taking the risk against Klitschko in Germany. Big reward attached to those. When you're fighting dangerous contenders in between elite champions, there's not as much reward attached to fighting dangerous contenders. That's just the way it is. So that is definitely something I can also say about Dillian Whyte, is he's been consistently fighting dangerous people more so than Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury. He definitely doesn't have any wins as impressive as Klitschko or Wilder on his record so far. Yeah, he can say that I would have beaten Wilder if I'd fought him, but, you know, everybody's woulda, coulda, shoulda. In terms of what he's actually done, he does not have the elite level wins that Tyson Fury has, but he does have a deeper resume. I'll give him that. And he's definitely got a better resume than Deontay Wilder. 100%. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Catch you on the next one. I'm out. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community. of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.